Today I'll be showing you how to create a simple infinite jump script for PC. This is a popular script commonly used in script hubs and admin commands like infinite yield. Let's get into it. Firstly, we are going to need a reference to something called the user input service. The user input service allows us to perform an action whenever the user presses a specific button on their keyboard, mouse, or phone. To define that, we need to type the following code. Local user input service equals game get service user input service. Once we have the reference to the user input service, we're going to need another reference to something called the local player. You can think of this as just the user running the script. To define a local player, we can type local player equals game players local player. Cool. Now we just need two more references. One for the player's character and one for something known as the humanoid root part. A great way to think of the humanoid root part is a part of your player's character that tracks your position and orientation. If we change the position for the humanoid root part, the same happens for our whole player's character. The two lines needed for that are local character equals player.character, local humanoid root part equals nil. Now, you might be wondering, why would we set humanoid root part to nil, meaning nothing? If we do this, it allows us to avoid errors when humanoid root part doesn't exist, or for better words, when the player dies. Now, onto user input service. Let's start with connecting a function to something called input began. Input began is a script signal we can use to efficiently handle player input. To do that, you can copy the following code. User input service .input began connect function. And then anything between these brackets and this end statement will fire when the player starts pressing a button. But firstly, we need to make sure it's actually a button of our choice. So let's check something called arguments or parameters. User input service.input began sends two arguments by default. One is the key code. Think of this as the type of input and the actual value of the input we are sending, like K on our keyboard, for example. And the second is something called game processed event. Game processed event tells us whether the user is chatting or in another UI element that changes this value, so we can avoid making players jump into the sky when they chat. To check if the user is pressing a key of our choice and whether he is not chatting, we will use the following code snippet. If keycode.keycode is equal to enum.keycode.c and not gameProcessedEvent, then end. As you can see here, I chose C for my bind. You can choose anything you want. Please do remember to pass keycode and gameProcessedEvent to the function. Now, all we need to do is check if the player's humanoid root part exists, and setting the reference back instead of leaving it as nothing. Remember before, we set it to nothing. Lastly, all we need to do is reinitialize our humanoid root part with an actual value, and in this case, it's the player's character humanoid root part. And now all we need to do is make him jump into the air. So to do that, we'll type humanoid root part assembly linear velocity equals vector3.new 0, 50, 0. Congratulations, you now have a walking infinite jump script just like infinite yield and many other script hubs. Be proud of yourself.